or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Evelyn, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the April 26th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. It's an obscure psychedelic used to treat trauma. Could it help me? Veterans and others who have suffered trauma and injuries are flocking to clinics around the world to take ibogaine. My own reason was deeply personal. The hallucinations began, by Robert Draper. The hallucinations began the moment I lay back onto the mat and pulled the mask over my eyes. Oh, I instantly thought, this is not at all what I expected. The first images were assembled like a film strip, a sharply focused Technicolor row of strong, grim-faced men who appeared to be some sort of tribal chiefs. Within seconds, a green tint covered their faces, which then dissolved, replaced by images of conflict. Bodies strewed across a battlefield, starving children. They too dissolved. A pile of rocks took shape. From the pile, several long, dark snakes slithered out. This could be unpleasant, I thought. A crackling sensation coursed through my entire body as if all my neurons were firing, not in any way painful, but also inescapable. I could feel my hands sweating, my ears buzzed, and it wasn't long before I heard the murmuring voices of people who weren't there, followed by the sound of puking from people who were. There were 11 of us in the treatment room, in a basement in a cottage that overlooked the Pacific Ocean just south of Tijuana, Mexico, where ibogaine, a Schedule I drug in the United States, is legal. It was the night before Thanksgiving. We all had our reasons for coming to the treatment clinic called Ambio Life Sciences. Several in the group were veterans suffering from PTSD, traumatic brain injury, substance abuse, or some combination of those. A sex crimes detective had been in a terrible car accident and lost much of her short-term memory. A Marine veteran and blueberry farmer in Georgia was quietly drinking his life away. And there was Aaron, a Texas-based corporate consultant who had suffered trauma that began in childhood and continued in the workplace. Aaron's mat was next to mine at the far end of the treatment room. Because we were the only two in the group not to throw up during the 10-hour experience, we later referred to ours as the quiet corner. The drug is derived from the Tabernanthe iboga plant, found mainly in Gabon in Central Africa. The powerful hallucinogen has long been used there in the initiation ritual that is part of the Bwiti spiritual tradition, involving an intense all-night group ceremony of dance and music and firekeeping that culminates in a trance-like state. Knowledge of the drug spread in the United States in 1962 when an American named Howard Lotsoff tried ibogaine and found that it cured him of his addiction to heroin. His campaign to explore ibogaine's potential as a cure for substance abuse has gained momentum more recently as nonprofit groups like the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies and Veterans Exploring Treatment Solutions, VETS, have assisted military veterans in using ibogaine to treat combat-related traumas. Because of the association with veterans, ibogaine has received the kind of legitimizing attention from political leaders, including conservatives, that is rare for psychedelics. As a political reporter, I regularly talk with such figures, and I first heard about ibogaine last year from the retired U.S. Senator Kyrsten Sinema. When I spoke with her, she had just come back from the Ambio Clinic herself after learning about its ibogaine treatments from veterans she knew. She told me it had been the opposite of a pleasant experience. Maybe 2 minutes of unsettling visions followed by endless hours of darkness, accompanied by a soundtrack of clanking in her ears, as if her brain were a car engine undergoing repair. But she left the clinic feeling that something powerful had occurred. A heaviness from her childhood, unspecified to me, had been processed. Things had shifted. Cinema told me that she went to Tijuana after learning about the clinical studies begun at Stanford University in 2022, which suggested that ibogaine was effective in treating traumatic brain injury, and that it also had the potential to reduce cerebral decline. Dementia claimed the mind of her beloved grandmother. After returning from Mexico to her home in Arizona, Cinema, a former Democrat who is now an independent, played a key role as the Republican-controlled state legislature approved funds to set up clinical ibogaine trials to treat veterans. Arizona was following the lead of Texas, where ibogaine had an even less likely political champion, the former governor, Republican presidential candidate, and Trump Energy Secretary Rick Perry. Intrigued, I wrote an article for the Times last August about Perry and his advocacy of ibogaine. Before trying the drug in September 2023, Perry, a former rancher and Air Force pilot, had never even smoked marijuana. But as governor, he became close with veterans who suffered severe psychic scars from war. They had found no relief until they traveled to Mexico and underwent ibogaine treatment. Perry, who experienced brain trauma from concussions in his youth, decided that maybe the drug had something to offer him as well. I began to consider the same thing myself after writing about Perry. The decision wasn't one to make lightly. Ibogaine is not a party drug. It's not sold on the street. No one takes it and then dances around a wooden figure burning in the desert. In my misspent youth, I had several psychedelic experiences, mushrooms, LSD, ecstasy, in recreational settings, accompanied by booze and loud music and fellow young idiots. Every trip was great fun, and I now believe a thoroughly missed opportunity. Nearly all of them took place in the years just before and just after the death of my brilliant wreck of an older brother when he was 23 and I was 22. Gawky and sullen and violent as a child, a 6'5" guitar-playing anti-hero by the time he hit 18, and then an alcoholic college dropout after that. Eli was the wave of my youth that I rode with chattering teeth. When I could not tame him, I tried simply to survive him, and then finally distance myself from him. The shadow that Eli cast over me in life and in death had gone almost completely unexplored. Decades passed before I began to see the connection between my frequent bouts of self-flagellation and the inevitable survivor's guilt that set in well before a car plowed into the motorcycle he was riding on the back of on the corner of 38th and Lamar in Austin on December 4th, 1979. All of which to say that I had more than journalistic curiosity to take with me to Tijuana. The 11 of us squeezed into 2 SUVs outside a hotel near San Diego's airport and were then ferried to the border. We had all undergone a screening procedure to ascertain whether we had medical concerns like a history of heart attacks and were sufficiently committed to the rigor we were about to face. The one guy in my van who made jokey small talk was a firefighter from Northern California. He made the trip to Ambio the previous year, but came away feeling that the experience was short-circuited by the disruptive behavior of a fellow patient whose psychiatric situation went undetected in the screening process. Everyone else was somber and freighted with whatever it was that had compelled them to embark on this journey to begin with, and apprehension about whatever lay ahead. As part of Ambio's protocol, all of us had agreed to refrain from alcohol and drugs for at least 2 weeks. We were given 2 rounds of coaching to prepare us. Lots of everyone's ibogaine experience is different, a clear and deliberate absence of guarantees that now, as we rode closer to our destination, left us hunched and wordless. About 20 minutes after crossing into Mexico, our caravan turned onto a dirt road that dead-ended at a rocky ledge overlooking the Pacific. The facility was reassuringly airy and modern, with several smiling staff members arrayed between us and a spacious patio that afforded a sweeping view of the ocean. The clinic was founded by three men: Trevor Millar, a Canadian who had operated an ibogaine clinic in Vancouver; another Canadian, Jonathan Dickinson, one of the world's leading scholars of the drug, as well as the only legal export licensee of the Tabernanth iboga root from Gabon; and Jose Inzunza, a Mexican paramedic who had been providing ibogaine to treat addicts in Tijuana for the previous 5 years. In partnership with VETS, which offers grants to military veterans for psychedelic therapy, Ambio took in its first patients in July 2021. A year later, Millar appeared on the podcast of Sean Ryan, a former member of the Navy SEALs. The show has over 5.8 million subscribers, and demand exploded. Ambio now treats 140 patients a month in Tijuana. In January, it opened a second ibogaine clinic on Malta's Malia Bay. The waiting list is long and the cost is considerable: $8,350 for the 5-day regimen, not including airfare to and from San Diego. Veterans receive a $1,000 discount. Dozens of other ibogaine treatment facilities exist, from Mauritius to Iceland to Indonesia, some pricier and more conspicuously deluxe, catering to affluent seekers of wellness. Improper administration of the drug can lead to arrhythmia or cardiac arrest, and I decided to go to the well-established Ambio-like Cinema, Perry, and several veterans I talked to. The increasing interest in ibogaine coincides with a rising skepticism about Western healthcare and a corresponding interest in alternative therapies, including psychedelics. Officials in the Trump administration, especially the Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, Jr., the Food and Drug Administration Commissioner Martin McCreary, and the Veterans Affairs Secretary Doug Collins, have been receptive to such alternative treatments, though to date no significant policy shifts have been advanced. Unlike therapy involving other psychedelics, ibogaine is not a guided experience. No shaman or talk therapist is present. The only dialogue is between you and the drug. But because it's considerably more powerful than those other psychedelics, the whole endeavor, 12 unpredictable hours lying flat on your back at the mercy of a mysterious substance with unpredictable powers, is sufficiently daunting that Ambio seeks to foster a "we're all in this together" esprit de corps among the group. We were shown to our rooms. Mine was spare but sunny, with a balcony overlooking the ocean. A staff member rifled through my bag to make sure that I hadn't smuggled in any alcohol or drugs. Our phones would be confiscated. These formalities were a reminder that we had all made a commitment, and not just to ourselves. Then we sat together, watching a welcome video in which Millar offered a few words that I'm sure were intended to be encouraging. Taking ibogaine is like getting on a roller coaster. There might be ups, there might be downs. The only real rule of roller coasters is just don't try to get off in the middle of the ride. Not everybody has visions with this medicine, and you don't need to have visions for ibogaine to work for you. Nausea is super common. I'd say 75 to 85% of people are going to throw up at least once. You might hear things. It might sound as though a whole bunch of new people entered the room. So those can be fun, actually. Just lean into them. After lunch, we took our seats in the living room, and each of us said a few words about why we were there. With few exceptions, the sentiments ranged from desperation to futility. A Navy veteran in his 30s said that he had tried everything to stop drinking except suicide, and that was next. A frail-looking woman in her 60s introduced herself as a refugee from Eritrea, where there had been war. After that, she began crying and couldn't say anything else. When it was my turn, I spoke somewhat sheepishly about a plight that didn't seem to rise to the level of what the others had shared. I'm too hard on myself, I said. I don't feel like I deserve joy, and I know it's all connected to the death of my brother, who didn't get the breaks I got. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 26th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. What else could I say? That it actually wasn't my successes I felt guilty about, but my failures, that I'd fallen woefully short of protecting our younger brother from Eli, even though John didn't remember it that way, that I was dogged by my own cowardice in the face of a giant sociopath, one who terrorized our entire family while loving and sparing me the most, that I wasn't doing enough with my own life after he'd been denied the same chance. Ibogaine is often portrayed as a kind of miracle drug, a breaker of addictions, a healer of trauma, possibly even a cure for neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's and ALS. Nearly everyone in the room seemed well past the point of believing in miracles. A few of them had tried ayahuasca, the psychoactive plant medicine that is indigenous to South America. I know of one woman, a survivor of brutal sexual assaults, who reclaimed her life after taking ayahuasca in Canada, and I know of another woman who has undergone repeated ayahuasca therapy and remains a nervous wreck. Ketamine, ecstasy, psilocybin, microdosing, the same disparity in results. My group knew too much. Hopefully, though we were, the prospect of failure loomed over us. After a surprisingly deft dinner, cream of poblano soup, citrus salmon, quinoa risotto, we were each fitted with an intravenous port and then sat together in the living room, haloed by our drip poles and IV nutrition bags containing a cocktail of vitamins to maintain our health during the coming period of fasting and drug intake while trading mordant jokes. Time crawled. Roughly 24 hours from now, we would receive the first dose of ibogaine. Until then, after we slept and through the next day, there were deep breathing exercises to help prepare us for the inevitable nausea. Then yoga, one-on-one counseling to make sure each of us was ready. On rare occasions, someone will back out or be gently informed by the Ambio staff that they don't seem fully committed to the process and should pack their bags. A light lunch of lentil soup and tuna tostadas, that was our last meal before the experience 10 hours later. We had a Q&A with Isaac Pulido, a mellow gentleman who had administered ibogaine to over 4,700 patients and would soon be providing it to 11 more. Blood pressure monitoring, 2 bags of intravenous magnesium to reduce the risk of cardiac arrhythmias that ibogaine can cause. Another group session, a massage, scribbling on a piece of paper the things we wanted to divest ourselves of, the so-called burn sheet that we would each throw into a fire just before the first dose, but mostly the quiet torment of waiting. Counting down the minutes until nightfall, I retreated to my room and wrote on my notepad, I'm telling myself that the drug is a proxy for God and to put my trust in Him. At 8:30 in the evening, on the dark and chilly patio, we stood around a fire and each took a fat red capsule with water. Relief engulfed me. This was finally happening. A few of us sat upstairs in the TV room and stared blankly at reruns of The Office. We returned to the living room for a second capsule at 9:15 p.m., then a third at 9:30 to stagger the intensity of the journey. At 9:45, Isaac approached each of us with a spoon, the fourth and final dose in powder form, mixed with honey, apparently to speed up the metabolizing of the drug. 15 minutes later, we filed downstairs to the long rectangular basement room where we had done yoga earlier. Now there were 11 mattresses on the floor with pillows from our bedrooms, a blanket, and a small bucket in case we needed to vomit. At the foot of each mattress was a small mirror and a maraca. I took my place in the corner farthest from the entrance. A medic affixed heart monitor patches to my chest. Aaron, the Texas-based corporate consultant, took the mattress a few feet away to my right. She had brought a journal, expecting to capture her impressions throughout the journey. 5 minutes into it, Aaron wrote, "And now I need to lie down." And that was the last of her musings. I searched for words, but only the most awkward came out. See you on the other side." Laughing, she replied, "Have fun, I guess." The lights dimmed, and the staccato sound of the Bweedy mouth harp poured out of the speakers. I was relieved to learn that while there were a few respectful nods like this, the ambio approach was not to pretend that we were Gabonese. It seemed to be more about the drug's properties and how best to bring them out, rather than an attempt to envelop us in any specific culture. I sat in front of the mirror, but it was dark, and I'd left my glasses up in my room. I heard Isaac encourage us to pick up our rattle and synchronize ourselves with the music. Everyone did so. For maybe a minute I tried this, feeling faintly ridiculous, then somewhat lightheaded. I fell back onto the mat and pulled the mask over my eyes. The drug was in charge. This was my first cogent thought as my brain took in the slideshow of tribal chiefs and famine-stricken people and my family, my deceased parents and brother, my living brother, my wife, and the snakes. I'd been encouraged by my ambio counselor to come to the ibogaine with humble requests. How can I feel better about myself? How can I become more spiritually connected? Lying on my back with my body afire and disembodied voices murmuring in my ears, I found this notion truly hilarious. If anything, I was in awe of the drug's power. We were told that if things got too intense, we could lift up our eye mask and the hallucinations would go away. I did this only once, when I became aware of an external disturbance, the Eritrean woman needing an oxygen tank to help with her pre-existing lung congestion, and a fellow whose bladder somehow became swollen, necessitating a catheter so that he could urinate. Otherwise, I stayed within the ibogaine, mesmerized by the drug's powder. Surrender, I told myself, less of a plea and more of a hallelujah. My dead brother Eli came and went among the images like everyone else, not a person of dominant interest to the drug, and I decided to let that rustle inside me. I did make a request to see my wife, but I also asked the ibogaine not to let the image of her crumble, because such a spectacle might suggest pain, and she was already grieving the death of her mother. Sure enough, Kirsten appeared, radiant as in real life. The image held itself together, replaced eventually by something else. The drug could be merciful and brutal. Directly behind me, I could hear two veterans take turns throwing up in an agonized cacophony. Nausea rose up in me. I remembered to inhale deeply through my nostrils and expel heavily through my mouth. The feeling subsided, only to return several times throughout the night, but now I knew I could defeat it. Presently I saw myself. It was not an image I recognized from any photo album or from any reflection in the mirror. I was smiling, projecting self-assurance, with no shadow nor any heavy weight cast over me. That somehow was me. The image grew closer until I could see only my face and then only my eye, which finally swallowed me up. And I saw something else. A scrap of paper from a yellow legal pad bearing a few sentences of a child's painstaking scrawl, instantly recognizable to me as my handwriting in second grade, the year I decided I wanted to be a writer. My origin story, the story in any event, was mine, not my brother's. That was what the ibogaine had to say to me. Other visions appeared that either lacked coherence or made little sense, like Babe Ruth batting right-handed and a small army of rats scurrying across a grassy area. At certain points I might have fallen asleep. At others I heard someone in the treatment room say something that, I learned later, they never said. Darkness occasionally set in, never in an unnerving way, though I did find myself wondering, good Lord, how long will this last? Ibogaine induces ataxia, a lack of muscle coordination, which meant that going to the bathroom required raising your hand, after which a medic would hoist you onto a wheelchair and cart you to the bathroom and help you wrestle down your pants while your mind reeled from visions and murmurs. I went through this only once. We were each provided with a water bottle, but as parched as the drug made me feel, I decided not to drink any more to avoid the disorientation of the mask removal and the wheelchair. Throughout the hours, the music being played for us remained the one constant, a 200-song selection of African, Latin, Asian, and electronic sounds that had been curated by Ambio. None of them sounded familiar, apart from a single ill-advised Coldplay track, and nearly all of them possessed a benevolent, subtly insistent quality, like a guide's gentle tug into the unknown. One leaped out at me, a slow, mournful chant derived from the Kenyan song Kothbiro and performed by the group Shantala. I heard the song several times that night, though I was later informed that no song was played more than once. Finally, a voice gently said, "It's time for your magnesium." I lifted my mask and saw a shaft of light through a window. Aaron asked what time it was. 8 a.m., the nurse said, as the IV poles were wheeled up to our mattresses. What was surely the most rigorous night of my life had officially ended. At 10:30, my 2 bags of magnesium was drained. The nurse peeled the heart monitor patches off my chest. A medic helped me to my feet and kept his arm around me as I made my way up 2 flights of stairs to my room. I fell onto my bed and the medic closed the door behind him. It was Thanksgiving. But for me, it was what Ambio calls Gray Day, a skillful feat of understatement. My entire body ached from 10 hours of what felt like low-grade electrocution. Closing my eyes, I immediately concluded that sleep was out of the question. I saw the photographic strips. I kept hearing the chants. Waves of nausea rippled through me. A few hours passed before a medic knocked on my door and led me downstairs for Reiki, a Japanese form of what is called energy massage. She passed her hands just above my body for an hour, to zero effect. Across the hall, I could hear Aaron sobbing. Only half of us made it to dinner. Those who did looked as defeated as I felt. I managed 2 tablespoons of chicken broth before excusing myself for the evening. Lying on my bed like a sack full of bones, hounded by the chants and the flickering images, I wondered what I'd inflicted on myself, and the damage was permanent. And if I'd finally done it, the mistake to end all mistakes. I woke the next morning to a roar of sunlight. Standing, I could detect no aches, no dizziness, no recurrent sounds or visions. My mind gleamed. The world sparkled. I then remembered what Rick Perry told me about the day after his gray day. The thought came to me, this is how you're supposed to feel for the rest of your life. I was as calm and as happy as I'd been in memory. Most, if not all in the group, had found new vigor. We attacked our breakfast and swapped stories. Aaron, it turned out, had also seen Babe Ruth. Another saw a big eye winking at him. One of the veterans recalled a miniature Hulk jumping rope. The blueberry farmer confessed that it had been the most horrible event of my life. The sex crimes detective said that she asked to speak with the medicine, but I got no answer. A young man who drove an ambulance said he wasn't convinced that the drug had any effect on him at all, until he suddenly retched and a tar-like substance fell out in a heap, and he felt as if something had been exorcised from him. Later that afternoon, the staff asked us if we would like to embark on one last journey by inhaling the fast-acting tryptamine known as 5-MeO-DMT, derived from the toxic secretions of the Sonoran desert toad. We were told that the trip would be far more brief, usually on the order of 10 minutes per dose, with 2 doses on offer, and could feel like an out-of-body experience with the additional effect of sanding off the rough edges of the ibogaine journey. 10 of us said yes. This time, each of us returned to the treatment room individually. I was the last to receive the drug. One by one, I watched the others return from the room, looking dazed but also somewhat bedazzled, as if they'd just watched their own birth. A few minutes before it was my turn, I was sitting in the TV room on the second floor when I heard a scream from below. It was Rick, an Army Ranger who had deployed to Afghanistan and Iraq. He was the least conspicuous among us until the ibogaine kicked in, and he spent the entire evening vomiting his guts out. Now, after receiving his second dosage of 5-MeO-DMT, he was screaming. Jay, it was the name of his buddy who had been killed in combat, when perhaps Rick felt it should have been him instead. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 26th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Then I heard someone call for me. Somewhat unsteadily, I descended the stairs. Rick had already left. There was only one mattress on the floor with 2 Ambio staff members sitting beside it. One of them, a young woman named Kay, held a long-stemmed pipe. I sat on the mattress. Kay lit the pipe and moved it to my lips. I inhaled and put it on my eye mask. The other staff member, Zach, guided me to lie back. In an instant, I could feel that I was somewhere else. Where was it? I saw what appeared to be a pattern of computer graphics, but no people, no slideshow. My mind skittered through the darkness, feeling my hunger from all the fasting, wondering what time it was, hearing Rick's screams, asking myself why any of this should be on my mind right now. I found my hand drifting to my solar plexus. It was something I often do, as if to rub a sore spot or to ward off contact there. And then lying on the mattress, I recalled a black and white photograph that my younger brother John recently dredged up. It was of me at age 3 or 4 on the front lawn of our first home in Houston. I was lying flat on my back on the grass. Eli, 4 or 5, was lying directly on top of me. Apparently he wasn't trying to hurt me. After all, our mother was standing nearby taking the photograph. But the look on my face in the photograph was not one of happiness. I looked trapped, suffocated. And from there, my memories leaped ahead a decade or so. This time I was on my back, and Eli was sitting on my stomach with his knees pinning my arms to the ground. With his index fingers, he was stabbing away at my solar plexus. This really happened. It happened several times to me and to John, and it also happened to Eli. Being tormented by the neighborhood kids and in the way of the bullied, he had become a bully himself. John, who today is a psychologist, had moved on from all that, but I had not. I could still feel Eli's weight on me. I was still, in work and in life, trying to understand why bullies did what they did. The endless transmission of pain from one human receptor to the next. And amid that psychological inquest, I'd fixated on what the world had done to Eli, so as to forget what he had done to me. Robert, came Kay's searching voice, are you still on your journey? I don't know, I said. I lifted my mask and sat up. I had been there for 20 minutes, completely still, Zach said, completely relaxed. I found that hard to fathom. Kay offered me a second dosage. I agreed, and then with the pipe back to my lips, I changed my mind, thinking, what if I forget any of this? I don't want to risk it. Time was now speeding up for me. Tomorrow I'd be home, and I wanted to find out what I would be taking with me. So what did it all mean? What did the ibogaine do, apart from slapping my psyche about like a leaf in a blizzard? I've been asking myself these questions, especially when I'm irritable or despondent. And what I'd say is that those questions are not so much an accusation as an invitation to explore, to connect, and to grow, while not losing sight of that glimpse I had of myself once upon a time in a basement south of Tijuana. I called Rick, the Army Ranger for whom the entire experience had been particularly dramatic. To my relief, Rick told me that he was in Maine and that other than being snowed in, he felt great. The lingering pain from having fractured vertebrae in his neck in paratrooper training was gone. He also quit dipping tobacco and was still sober. Something weightier was gone as well, though maybe not entirely, and like me, he was left with questions to wrestle with. He was doing the same thing I was, listening to the 200-song Ibogaine playlist that Ambio had given us all to take home. A memory had been triggered, Rick said. At some point, I'd left my body and I was looking down at the mattress, and I saw myself wrapped in cotton cloth like I was a mummy. It made him wonder, was he still trapped in the cloths, or had he been released, mummified forever, or preparing to burst forth like a butterfly from a chrysalis? That was my question, too. The distance between the childhood image of myself pinned by my brother to the ground and Ibogaine's transfigured image of myself, liberated from self-doubt and guilt, recalled that message affixed to rear-view mirrors. Things were closer than they appeared, but now it was an urging rather than a warning. From here I could see the destination. I could get there. The rich and the powerful want to live forever. What if they could? From the Kremlin to Silicon Valley, some of the most powerful people in the world now want something more: eternal life. By Mark O'Connell. One day, two emperors, the Emperor of China and the Emperor of Russia, were walking side by side through the Forbidden City. As they walked, their steps cushioned by an embroidered carpet of red and gold, their retinues followed along behind in cheerful deference. Both emperors were 72 years old, about the age at which the people they ruled over typically died. Though neither spoke the other's language, they talked contentedly through their interpreters of the possibility of cheating death. At one point, the Chinese emperor remarked that while in the past it was rare for a person to live beyond 70, these days it was said that at 70 one was still a child. At this, the Russian emperor became more animated. It was possible now, he suggested, to take out an aging man's heart or liver and to replace it with a new organ, so that in spite of his advancing years, the man would become younger and younger and perhaps even evade death entirely. Then the exchange stops abruptly, like one of the fractured clay tablets on which the ancient Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh is etched, ending the narrative. This fragmentary form only adds to the strange intensity of the moment. The sense of being party to a scene we were not supposed to glimpse, in which some secret about the nature of power is hinted at. Perhaps you saw this video last September when it went viral. The two most powerful autocrats in the world, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, both of whom have been heads of state for well over a decade, and neither of whom shows any signs of intending to relinquish that power, caught by an interpreter's hot mic, discussing their own apparent shared desire for immortality. The moment, though brief, felt lavishly over-determined, rich in a kind of mythic political symbolism. Xi and Putin were walking toward Tiananmen Square, the ceremonial center of the world's emerging superpower and a place synonymous with the government's brutal suppression of dissent. For a brief euphoric moment in 1989, it seemed as if Chinese communism might pass into history, creating space for the birth of some new democratic possibility. And then the tanks rolled in, announcing the state's power as eternal and indivisible, the lives of its subjects as entirely disposable. Over the past decade or so, democracy has been retreating against a rising tide of illiberalism and plutocracy. Power in much of the world is becoming more and more concentrated in the hands of a few authoritarian leaders and a small number of expansively ambitious tech billionaires. As average life expectancy has increased, inequality in income and in access to health care has widened. And amid all of this, the world's wealthiest and most powerful have developed a persistent hope, and perhaps even generated some small possibility that death might be eradicated entirely or pushed back so far that its existential force is diminished. The fact of death is famously a source of terror and melancholy, but also one of consolation. Say what you like about historical dynasties, but even the worst of hereditary sovereigns couldn't rule from the grave. Henry VIII died in his mid-50s. Cesare Borgia barely made it into his 30s. Blunt instruments though they may have been, morbid obesity and syphilis played their roles as agents of change. If even the greatest tyrants must eventually die, there is always some hope for a better world, or at least a different one. But what if the tyrant succeeds in making himself immortal, or in expanding his allotted lifespan so radically that he might as well be? But what if autocrats like Xi or Putin were to extend their rule by decades, or even to rule indefinitely, never relinquishing their grip on their respective states, on the lives of their citizens? Such a prospect is, to say the least, still scientifically remote. But that these two leaders seem to want it in the first place, and seem to believe that science might facilitate it, suggests something important about our political era, and hints at the shape of the era to come. We live under the sign of the vampire. Among the most potent archetypes of our time is the elite, who seeks eternal youth, whose power is drawn from the blood of lower mortals, and the most prominent of our current elites is the small upper echelon of capitalists whose technologies, social media, online retail, artificial intelligence, data surveillance, determine our present and mold our future, and who wield an increasingly disproportionate political power. And these men are, we know, obsessed with pushing out the horizons of human mortality. The man perhaps most associated with this desire is Peter Thiel, who once outlined his interest in blood plasma transfusions from the young as a means of extending life. But more practically and less vampirically, he has also invested many millions of venture capital dollars in various biotech concerns, seed funding a flourishing Silicon Valley longevity ecosystem. There are all these people, as he put it to Business Insider in 2012, who say that death is natural, it's just part of life, and I think that nothing can be further from the truth. The OpenAI chief executive Sam Altman has invested $180 million of his own fortune in Retro Biosciences, a Bay Area biotech concern aimed at stalling and potentially reversing human aging. Jeff Bezos is reportedly among the major funders of Altos Labs, a company that hopes to find stem cell therapies to extend human lifespans. The treatments pursued by such initiatives exist somewhere on the spectrum of plausibility. You could even imagine a scenario in which some of them eventually become accessible to ordinary people. Yet it also seems obvious that the tech mogul's obsession with longevity most specifically applies to their own. Thiel has signed himself up to be cryogenically preserved. Altman has said he takes the diabetes medication metformin as part of an anti-aging regimen, despite somewhat shaky evidence of its efficacy. And then there is Brian Johnson, who has devoted his online payments fortune to the monomaniacal pursuit of eternal life through a bewildering array of approaches: prodigious consumption of supplements, gene therapy, immunosuppressants, transfusions of plasma from his son, and the taking of detailed measurements as to the quality and durability of nocturnal erections. A lot of Johnson's endeavors are, at best, long shots, or less charitably, symptomatic of some deep pathology, but his naked yearning to escape the human condition itself exposes the half-sublimated desire at the heart of the more scientifically reputable life extension projects. The goal of this enterprise of Johnson's sacramental observances is a monotheism of the self, is to slow and eventually reverse the processes of aging, and to thereby become and remain biologically indistinguishable from an 18-year-old, Johnson's motto and the tagline of his proprietary longevity regimen. Project Blueprint is "Don't Die." In its reduction of multiple disparate imperatives of the pharmaceutical industry, of the Christian faith, of American individualism, to a single command, it must be admitted that this formulation has about it the simple-minded genius of a classic advertising slogan. Don't die is the precise message audible in your heart's every finite beat. encoded in your troubled dreams and futile anxieties. What do these men, these autocratic heads of state and staggeringly wealthy technologists have in common other than desire to don't die? They have, for one thing, arrived, through ruthlessness and ingenuity, through the obsessive pursuit of power and personal enrichment, at an Olympian distance from the mortals from whom their profit and power derive. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 26th issue of the New York Times Magazine on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Consider the tech billionaire. This is a man who has amassed unimaginable wealth through the disruption of economic and social relations. He has completely reshaped how we buy things, how we pay for them. He has changed how we interact with our fellow humans. He has restructured our brains and reordered the global economy and is now creating the ultimate technology, the one that promises to do away once and for all with the need for human intellectual labor. Is it not right that such a man should buy his way out of death, that he should break this last tie that binds him to the fate of his fellow humans? Indeed, just as it represents the final victory of capital over labor, AI is also being pointed toward a greater and more decisive victory, the victory of technology over the human condition itself. The futurist and entrepreneur Peter Diamandis is convinced that AI can facilitate huge increases in human lifespan. In 2023, he unveiled X Prize Health Span, a 7-year competition for longevity research whose goal is to award $101 million to a team that successfully develops a proactive, accessible therapeutic that restores muscle, cognition, and immune function by a minimum of 10 years, with a goal of 20 years in persons aged 65 to 80 in 1 year or less. The prize is backed by the Hevolution Foundation, a longevity-focused nonprofit with a $1 billion annual budget largely funded by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as part of its plan to make the country into a global hub of longevity research and innovation. As with the likes of Altos Labs and Retro Biosciences, Hevolution employs an egalitarian language in its public communications. Aging, the company says, is a condition that affects every human on the planet, and therefore every human has the right to live a longer, healthier life. And yet, it's hard to imagine that the Bangladeshi and Pakistani migrant workers who account for much of the Saudi workforce, many of whom are essentially indentured laborers, are likely to have the same access to new lifespan extending technologies that their employers or their employers' employers do. Singapore, too, has emerged as a hub for experimental life extension, with longevity-focused venture funds like Immortal Dragons investing millions in biotech startups. In a recent interview with the Financial Times, the fund's founder, Boyang Wang, revealed that one of the companies in his portfolio is working on brainless clones. The aim, he said, is to deliberately induce hydroencephaly, a disease in which infants are born without cerebral hemispheres, but in which the basic functions of the body are in working order. If we can trigger this artificially in the future, it might become a backup body for yourself. Imagine if we can do a brain transplant, then this new body can become our second home. As an actual scientific possibility, this is distant or even outright fantastical, but it is worth thinking about on just those terms. What is revealed by this particular vision of the future, by this fantasy of literally mindless humans who would serve as repositories of spare parts to extend the lives of their wealthy owners? Power is its own kind of immortality project. The power to leave your mark on the world, to mint coins bearing your image, to redraw maps is the power on a symbolic level to deny death. Over the past 4 years, Putin has sent hundreds of thousands of young Russians to their deaths in Ukraine, in a war that has also killed more than 100,000 Ukrainians. He has said that his decision to invade was rooted primarily in geopolitical considerations, that it was a response, first and foremost, to the threat of an eastward expansion of NATO. But the deeper motivation seems imperial. Putin wants to remake the map of Eastern Europe and to reconstruct a lost and betrayed Russian empire, and in so doing to shore up his power at home. His accidentally public musings about the prospect of immortality through science seem to emerge out of the same grand narcissistic fantasy as his project of imperial restoration. As with so many futuristic dreams, the project of radical life extension reveals something important about our present. It appeals to the super wealthy and to authoritarian leaders like Putin, not merely because it allows them to deny the certain prospect of their own deaths, but also because of the reactionary energies it channels. Xi, it seems, is less concerned with personal immortality than Putin. Watching that hot mic clip, it's easy to imagine that he was really just indulging the eccentric preoccupations of his Russian counterpart, or if no other reason, then it was something to talk about while they walked to the podium. But in 2018, Xi rescinded a 2-term limit on the presidency that had been in place for decades, removing any legal barrier to his serving as leader for life. And like Putin, he is driven by a desire to restore his country to a former imperial grandeur. The great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation and the redressing of humiliations imposed on the country during the 19th and early 20th centuries by Western imperial powers have been presiding goals of his premiership. China's seemingly inexorable rise under Xi's leadership to global hegemony secures him a kind of figurative deathlessness. It's not quite immortality, but it's not nothing either. The obsession with bodily immortality has a long pedigree in Chinese history. Chinese alchemists believed that they could synthesize gold through compounds of arsenic and lead and mercury, and that drinking such compounds in a liquid form might impart the metal's incorruptible essence to the human body. The 24 Histories, a collection of the official chronicles of the Chinese dynasties, records that drinking the golden elixir caused the deaths of no fewer than 6 emperors of the Tang dynasty alone. The symbolic connection between gold and immortality transcends cultures and historical periods. For the ancient Egyptians, gold was associated with the life-giving power of the eternal sun, and for the alchemists of medieval and early modern Europe, it was both a symbol and potential source of eternal life. Because of its comparative rarity and because it is a metal that does not tarnish or corrode with time, gold became the universal substance of wealth, something that could be passed on to descendants, as kings handed on power to their heirs. A person could live on in his money as he lived on in the structures it built, the temples, the cathedrals, the libraries and galleries and opera houses, the technologies and the social orders. These lines of magical thinking have now been rewoven in a more technologically sophisticated form. In his 2023 Techno-Optimist Manifesto, the billionaire venture capitalist Mark Andreessen made the following assertion: "We believe artificial intelligence is our alchemy, our philosopher's stone. We are literally making sand think." This was something of a tell, this invocation of the philosopher's stone, a mythical material that the alchemists of antiquity and the Middle Ages believed could transmute base metals into gold, and could be used to produce a potion that granted its drinker eternal youth. This is the promise of technology, that it will intercede between us and our deaths. This is the promise of money itself. For now, though, no matter how greatly a person is enlarged by his wealth, his own power and prestige, there is no escaping the determinism of death. Brian Johnson will die, Peter Thiel will die, Sam Altman will die, Xi Jinping will die, Donald Trump will die, Vladimir Putin will die, and so will you, and so will I, and so will all those now living and yet unborn. Not a one of us will be saved, not by 3D printed organs, not by artificial superintelligence, not by transfusions of plasma from our beloved and indulgent teenage sons. None of these things will intervene between even the richest and most powerful of us and our common animal end. The great and terrible democracy of death abides. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 26th issue of the New York Times Magazine. Your reader has been Evelyn, Thank you for listening.
Coming up next on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the USA Today. Following that at 2 o'clock is episode number 1 of Ira Gershwin by Michael Owen. Stay with us for these readings and more. You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. We broadcast daily
Hello. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind,